Perfect. I have another review for you guys, and this book is called Corpse Walker: Real Life Stories, China from the Bottom Up by Yiwu, translated by Wen Hyung. And this book was published by Pantheon Books in April of 2008. This book has 336 pages, and it only has 560 ratings on Goodreads. So essentially, this is a nonfiction book, and from what I understand, Liao is, I think he won the Peace Prize. He is a renowned poet and definitely a political activist against the Chinese government, and especially after I read Tombstone, The Great Chinese Famine from 1958 to 1962, this book kind of works well with that piece of nonfiction, because while Tombstone was very fact-based, well, it was very numbers-based, it had a lot of numbers in it, and just had like the straight facts of what happened, Corpse Walker is the personal stories of really how many different people were affected by, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution that happened in China since the 1950s. What this book is a piece of nonfiction, and while Liao is known for his poetry, this is not necessarily an example of his writing. This is pretty much him interviewing all these different people from all these different walks of life. And originally this book was titled Interviews with the People from the Bottom Rung of Society. And I guess this book needs a bit of background. Like I said, this book is a really good companion to the book Tombstone by Yi Shanwan about the Great Chinese Famine from 1958 to 1962. Those dates are burned in my mind forever. Like, Liao Yu almost died from edema and starvation during that time period. His father's family were landowners, so of course his father was deemed a political enemy and counter-revolutionary and rightist, blah blah blah. And eventually his mother had to divorce herself from him. They decided to divorce so that at least him and his mother could actually have a chance for a decent life underneath the communist ruled China. Eventually he grew up, he became a poet and musician, and he eventually started protesting against the government. He wrote, I think his piece of poetry that kind of got him to more notoriety was a poem that was against the Tiananmen Square massacre. It kind of spread underground, and what happened was he couldn't even write it down. He actually recorded it on a cassette tape, and it spread through cassette, because, I mean, if you see a piece of paper, you can clearly read what the poem is, but if you just see a cassette, you don't know exactly what it is. You have to actively play it. And he kept speaking out against the government, and subsequently everything that Liao Yu is pretty much banned in China. This book is banned in China. If he tries to write a book of poetry, the publishers are punished by the government. Right? If they publish a poem that he does, they're not allowed to publish anything for a year. So pretty much eventually Liao Yu he made a living in China by just doing odd jobs and being like a street musician. And through essentially he's like one of the bottom people that are on the bottom rung of society, and just throughout his travels and people that he's known through his life, he has decided to interview them, and some of them he had recorded the interviews on tape, and others he would say in here if he's trying to recreate the interview from memory. But majority of what's said in here is not Liao Yu's words, it's the words of these other people, so it's not necessarily representative of what this author typically does. I really did like this book because it really ties together a lot of things that I've read about the Cultural Revolution, and it has a bunch of different perspectives on really the result of the Cultural Revolution. And so interviews so many different types of people. He interviews people that they still try to carry on the traditions that the Chinese people have been doing for centuries, but at the same time those practices are looked down upon and discouraged by the government, and so a lot of people end up on the bottom rung of society. And also he interviews some people that are in the situation they're in because of the policies of the government, whether it is because of the one-child policy and therefore a subsequent result of that is the increase of human trafficking. He interviews like a human trafficker, he interviews like a corpse walker, which was a Chinese tradition. He interviews like morticians, he interviews people who were labeled as kind of revolutionaries by the government, people labeled like rightists by the government, people who were prominent, but because they said the wrong thing, they were cast aside and punished by the government. He interviews people that were persecuted by the government, and he also interviews some people that still support what the government did and just were supporters of the government during pretty much during the Cultural Revolution. It has so many different perspectives in this book, and all of the stories are kind of ultimately tragic, but they have they all have different tones to them, and it's very interesting how these people carry themselves and how you can hear like the sense of stoicism of all of these different people. Some of these stories, sometimes it kind of seems like they're too fantastical, or like you can't believe people could live through this and not like be bawling, trying to going through like post-traumatic stress, remembering and stuff. They probably do, or something like that. But it's just really interesting where they just talk about what they thought, what was going through their mind, what was the attitude at that time, how could they go through with this, how could they go along with this line of thinking, how misguided they were, or just, the reality of life back then. And one thing that I thought was very, very interesting about Corpse Walker, and it's kind of, you see, this book is trying to structure it, and you can see like what they say to each other. They have it's done in like a script type of style where you see what the author says and then the response, and you get the reaction from the author himself of these people. Like some of these people, the author, you really clearly respects and admires. Other people, you is like, you're a scumbag, or he is incredulous, and he doesn't hide his skepticism. You can definitely tell what he thinks about these people. And one of these guys, you is like, oh my god, you're an idiot, some of these stories some of these stories are really heartbreaking. Some of them might make you laugh a bit. Some of them kind of seem really sad and tragic. And one of the things that I definitely got from this book is you get the impression of how much China has lost in terms of culture, because even like some of the really, really traditional things that when he's talking to some really traditional people that are still trying to carry on traditions that are now being admonished by the government, EU doesn't really know about them. He's like, oh, I've never heard about that. And then the person he's interviewing are like, and you guys, you've forgotten all these things, you don't do it anymore. And it kind of shows how much China has changed culturally, and that through the Cultural Revolution and just trying to abolish religion in a sense, a lot of Chinese people aren't aware of many things that were once very commonplace and just simple cultural traditions. He even interviews a woman who is a part of a religion that is banned and is deemed a cult, and everything that this government is doing just to get her to give up her religion is kind of horrific. I definitely enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Some of these stories have so many different tones, but I think it would be really interesting to see all these different stories done in like a bunch of short films. Like one of these stories can definitely be like a really cool prison escape movie, or one of the stories, it would have been such a beautiful short film about pretty much a guy who is super, super into the party, but he falls in love with a girl that is deemed to be from a background that is anti-communist. He has to struggle with rectifying how he has been taught to feel about a person like her and his feelings towards her. And some things will be shocking, and some things, might leave you feeling a bit incredulous, but at the same time, the interviewer Yiwu seems a bit incredulous themselves, but it's not clear that's saying all of these things are true. These things are based off of people's memories, and some people might embellish their memories, some people might leave stuff out, but this is just, I think, a really good way to actually see, an interesting, more complete picture of Chinese society, or at least another part of Chinese society that it's not easy to find out about and see. So yeah, I definitely recommend this book, Corpse Walker. And I kind of felt that The Corpse Walker was a good title for it, even though it's not the original title, because in a sense, a corpse walker, it has the one in this interview is with a corpse walker, and it sounds really weird and mysterious, but essentially what a corpse walker would do is if a person died in a place that they didn't live, a corpse walker would do that tradition to carry their body home or carry their body back to the people, back to their family for a proper burial. And in a sense, like corpse walker, a lot of these people are cast off from society and their stories don't get out, but because of the Yiyu's interview, a lot of these stories are being told and it's being shared with a lot of people all over the world that appreciate these stories and would want to hear these stories. And of course, the government in China probably doesn't want these stories to get out. Yeah, I definitely recommend this book if you're interested in nonfiction or interested in just a bunch of interview style stories with interesting people, interesting backgrounds, and if you're interested in just other cultures and history. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that review. Talk to you guys later. Bye.